Our story begins in a tower. Inside, our protagonist was battling a swarm of monsters. As he fought, an interface continually popped up, spurred by the cheers of spectators. He shouted in frustration, meeting the monster's attack head-on. He managed to slay one, but more than 100 others furiously charged towards him. He was on the ground, a sharp monster leg piercing his stomach. The spectators cried out, questioning why his predicament was so pitiful as monsters encircled him. He moved his hand, pulling out a shining dice. A system notification appeared, stating that climber Ha Heejung's sponsored constellation was using its ownership percentage to roll the dice of fate. Before this incident, a woman had called his name, Suhyuk, and told him she was a regressor. He dismissively referred to her as a crazy bitch. He stood up, suggesting they should just go home if she was going to talk nonsense. However, the woman gripped his hand tightly, insisting that there was no time for such reactions. She urged him to listen to what she had to say. He looked at her, puzzled by her serious demeanor. He asked her to explain, wanting to know if it was important. She warned him that the Tower of Trials would soon appear on Earth. His initial response was anger. He thought she was mocking him due to his recent heartbreak. He ended up with a lump on his head as she insisted that he pay careful attention to her words. With a stern expression, she told him he needed to remember 3 things. 1. He must never open his status window. 2. Until he reached the 6th floor, he should form a contract with the suckiest looking god. 3. When his ability awakened, he must hold onto his weapon. He fell silent, wondering if she was joking. She reiterated firmly that he must remember those 3 things. Regardless of the situation, he must never open his status window. Even if he was down to his last second, he must not give in. Opening the window would render the regression meaningless. He begrudgingly agreed. She reminded him that the second rule was to avoid forming a sponsorship contract with any god until he completed the tutorial on the 5th floor. Even if the most powerful or coolest looking gods offered contracts, he must refuse. Once he completed the tutorial, he would find a resting area before the 6th floor. It was there he should form a contract with the suckiest looking god. Her voice grew louder as she outlined the 3rd rule. Upon awakening his abilities, he must have a weapon like a sword, axe, or spear in his hands. If he held a wand, bow, or holy item, she threatened to kill him herself. He questioned her, arguing that magic was for men. He imagined that if he used fireball, people would line up to befriend him. But she countered his fantasy, telling him he lacked talent for magic. She mocked his attempts, highlighting how he used his wand like a cane, striking enemies on the head because he was incapable of casting spells. He grew angry and admonished her against lying. If he weren't to play as a wizard, he didn't want to participate at all. Yet, he found himself nursing a fresh lump on his head, parroting the 3 things she'd told him to remember. He assured her that he'd committed them to his heart. She seemed relieved and told him to continue. Suddenly, a system manifested before them. It announced that at the present moment, the prohibition on the green belt around Area C66,432 had been lifted as per the law, allowing 1 million chosen climbers from Area C66,432 to enter the Tower of Trials. It also stated that should they fail to conquer the Tower of Trials, their rights over Earth Area C66,432 would be revoked. He called out in panic, addressing the girl as Ha Heejung, demanding to know what it all meant. Was it all some elaborate joke? She tried to reply, but found herself suddenly unable to speak. Instead, she gestured to him, reminding him to remember the 3 things she'd shared. Shocked, he nodded in agreement, still unable to believe that Ha Heejung was a regressor. Suddenly, his surroundings began to shift erratically, throwing him into panic. He had so many more questions to ask, but the system had begun its work. The system displayed a message that had been delivered invisibly. The basic system of the Tower of Trials would be altered in accordance with Act C146231. Once the adjustment was complete, the Tower of Trials would henceforth be permitted to force climbers into unfair contracts and to intentionally deceive them. He was transported to the tower where the system welcomed him. It notified him that he had been chosen as a climber as per Act G14823 and prompted him to select one of the displayed equipment in preparation for the battles to come. He stood and surveyed the area, wondering if this was the Tower of Trials that Heejung had been speaking about. The system issued another notice. His job would be determined by the equipment he selected, and he would only get one opportunity to awaken his ability. Glancing back, he saw a range of equipment. Heejung's advice to choose a sword or a spear rang in his mind, but he felt drawn to the wand, entranced by the allure of magic. However, before he could take the wand, Heejung's words echoed again. He was incapable of using magic. He withdrew his hand, tears welling in his eyes. He knew he had to heed the Regressor's advice. He turned his gaze to a shabby long sword, an unsightly old weapon that looked as if it would shatter in an instant. The system inquired if he had chosen the shabby long sword. He affirmed his choice and grasped the sword. The system then advised him to open the status window, instructing him to simply say status window aloud. The system explained that the status window was an essential tool when climbing the Tower of Trials, and that climbers could enhance their abilities through it. He called out Heejung's name, feeling a sense of anticipation. The system notified him that he would receive 5 skill points to improve his climbing abilities once he opened the status window. It assured him that the status window would not only allow him to ascend the tower, but also enable him to track his progress and development. Without the status window, he would be unable to acquire or use skills. It implored him to open the status window, displaying a countdown of 5 remaining minutes. He looked at the time, wondering if he was truly okay. Feeling a compulsion to proceed, he pondered the nature of his situation, which eerily resembled a slave contract. The system indicated a remaining time of 1 minute and 49 seconds. Despite his internal vow to remain silent, he was seized with fear as the countdown dwindled to the final 10 seconds. Doubts surfaced. Should he voice his fears? Should he shout them out? Could he trust Heejung's assurances completely? If she was a regressor, shouldn't she have done this herself? Why did she even need him? What should he really do? To his surprise, the system informed him that his time had expired. Next, the system revealed that he hadn't chosen the status window and would consequently be transferred to the first floor of the Tower of Trials, a kind of consolation for his difficult decision. Calming himself with the realization that he was still alive, he watched as a light materialized behind him, enveloped him, and then swallowed him again. The system then informed him that since climber Kwon Sunhyuk had forsaken the status window, he had attained the status of Challenger. Therefore, Challenger Sunhyuk would not be disadvantaged by the imposed ability increase from the status window, and the tower difficulty for Sunhyuk would be adjusted to the existing Challenger stage. Moreover, from that moment forward, he was informed that the constellations might enter after changing his deity, and that his original deity may not function normally from the 6th floor onwards. He found himself transported to the first trial floor, tasked with eradicating all enemies within the remaining time of 17 hours and 59 minutes. Looking around, he found it difficult to see anything in the darkness. However, he reassured himself this was merely a tutorial, it would be fine. Swinging his sword into the void, he soon realized there was nothing there, causing him to question his own paranoia. Suddenly, a sound. Instinctively, he ducked, but lost his footing and stumbled. Without understanding how, he had narrowly avoided an attack. Picking himself up with the aid of his sword, he was oblivious to the fact he'd just struck something. Then, out of nowhere, something attacked him again. He managed to evade, but not without taking a hit to his shoulder, shocked at how quickly his situation had escalated. He then spotted a goblin, screeching about its intent to kill a human. As the goblin lunged, he moved back to avoid the attack. Gazing at the creature, he wondered what it was. In response, it claimed that he had been lucky to escape its surprise assault. The system indicated to him that the creature was a goblin assassin. Being an assassin in addition to its goblin nature, its strength lay in striking from the darkness, and it had a hidden special move. He aimed his sword at it, intending to create some distance and analyze its tactics. As it picked up a crossbow, the goblin taunted him by calling him stupid, catching him off guard. He realized that the earlier arrow wasn't a trap. He sprinted toward the goblin, knowing he needed to engage it before it could shoot its crossbow. The goblin aimed the weapon at him, teasingly telling him that he was too late. It fired an arrow, but he dodged it, realizing that he couldn't just fall prey to such a creature, especially when he was bigger than the goblin. Immediately, he charged at it, planning to kill it before it could reload the crossbow. However, as he closed the distance, the goblin attacked him with its knife. Relief washed over him as he twisted his body just in time to receive only a superficial cut. He then raised his sword and severed the goblin's head. Gasping, he stood up, scarcely able to believe that he'd killed the creature. Still, he reminded himself that he had no time to dwell on such matters. He turned his attention to the goblin's knife, planning to pick it up as a potential backup. He bent down to grab it, but a wave of dizziness struck him, and he collapsed beside the goblin's body. He looked at the knife, perplexed about the sudden dizziness, when the system provided an explanation. The goblin assassin's weapon was a crudely made dagger. It had been well maintained, a testament to the goblin's affection for it. Moreover, it was smeared with a homemade poison concocted by the goblin assassin. Upon reading this, he cursed under his breath and fell unconscious. The system popped up, showing him that he had successfully dodged a new trap for the first time. His agility had increased by 1. He had defeated the goblin's assassin for the first time, so his strength and agility had increased to 2. Furthermore, he overcame the goblin assassin's handmade poison and gained level 1 poison resistance. A moment later, he regained consciousness. He coughed up blood, but he managed to stand up. He wondered if he had fainted as he looked at the beheaded goblin, thinking that it was a close call. He looked up to see the time limit and realized that he had lost about 5 hours. He attached the goblin's crossbow and dagger to his belt, then placed the arrows on his back. He picked up his sword, swearing that he would survive. Then, he slowly and carefully walked, only to step on a trap. An arrow came towards him, but fortunately, he dodged it. He looked back to see it, realizing that he could dodge them easily, so he decided to test his theory. He triggered the traps on the ground using his sword and dodged them, realizing that the more he dodged, the easier they became. He began to wonder if his physical abilities were enhanced due to his talents awakening. He jumped speedily while avoiding the trap's attacks, realizing that he had become much faster. Suddenly, he spotted monsters in the distance. He immediately hid, but he noticed that they didn't move. This led him to think that they weren't aware of his presence yet. He put his sword on his arm and grabbed the crossbow, planning to kill one of them first so he could go for a one-on-one fight. He reloaded the arrow onto the crossbow and aimed for one of the goblins, but suddenly, he heard something behind him. He immediately looked back and jumped to the side to avoid it. Then he saw the goblins running toward him, making him realize that it was a trap. He blocked their attack using his sword while noticing that it was too dark there. He needed to move to a brighter place to see better. He jumped back near the light, causing the goblins to growl at him in anger. He calmed himself, knowing that he needed to stay calm. Then, an arrow flew towards him. He easily blocked it using his sword, but then he realized that he should instead be watching out for their next move. The system showed that they were a goblin couple, still goblins, but always together. He was surprised to find out they were a couple, and he remembered that up until yesterday, he was also part of a couple. He thought that if only he weren't trapped there, he might have been able to reconcile with her. In his anger, he slashed the male goblin's head in half. The creature collapsed, dead on the ground, as he looked at its wife. The weeping goblin woman called out to her husband, affectionately addressing him as honey, which only served to further embitter him. She condemned their union as a damned couple. Furiously, she lunged to attack him, but he was enraged. He countered, stating that being single was superior. Then, he decapitated her. As she died, she lamented that she couldn't seek revenge, her weapon slipping from her grasp. In her final moments, she apologized to her deceased spouse. He then angrily confronted a hidden goblin, one who skulked in the darkness, shooting arrows. He inquired whether this goblin was also part of a couple. Trembling, the goblin assured him it was not. Doubtful, he angrily questioned how he could trust such a coward. The goblin, petrified, insisted it was telling the truth. He smiled grimly, suggesting the goblin step into the light where he could end its life swiftly and cleanly. The proposal made the goblin shriek in fear. Nevertheless, it ventured out of the dark, pleading for mercy, claiming blindness in the light. The system revealed to him that this was a junior goblin, small and feeble. It was too young for combat and tended to hide in darkness when afraid. He queried why it was there at all. The goblin, raising its voice, called him a stupid human, explaining it was simply fulfilling its duty as a goblin. Angered by the insult, he threatened to spare its life, but the goblin's insult made it sob and scamper away. The goblin then knelt on the ground, shaking, pleading for mercy. This made Suhyuk question the nature of the creature before him. He told it he'd let it live if it answered his question. The goblin, eyeing him, asked if he was sincere and invited him to proceed with his question. He asked about the intentions of the monsters, but the goblin simply bowed its head again, trembling in fear. Finally, it revealed that as goblins, their duty was to obstruct humans. Hearing this, he responded that he had no choice. He did not wish to kill a child but felt compelled to do so. The goblin whimpered in fear, but he simply stated that both of them were merely carrying out their duties. The goblin retorted that goblins didn't have to perform their duties, but he contradicted it, reminding the goblin it had just asserted it was necessary. Despite this, the goblin maintained its stance, causing him to threaten it with a slap. He pondered if the goblin was referring to itself in its protestations. He felt he couldn't fully trust it but couldn't help wondering if it should not be classified as an enemy and whether he could still complete the quest in such a case. The goblin, in a panic, insisted goblins don't lie, urging him to trust it. He stopped in his tracks, contemplating whether he should have simply killed the goblin in the dark. The goblin continued to assure him of its honesty, claiming that goblins did not need to fight, and he should trust it. He lowered his sword, thinking he could delay its end, but wondered if he could still kill it later. The system then reminded him that he had only 10 hours and 11 minutes remaining to eliminate all the enemies. Nevertheless, he declared to the goblin that he wouldn't kill it, which caused the creature to look at him joyfully. The system then announced the start of a hidden mission, the salvation of the junior goblin. This was a secret task from the first floor challenger's tutorial titled Goblin's Hidden Sorrow. In Ha Heejung's tutorial, she was concealed behind a large stone, surreptitiously observing the goblins who were on the hunt for her. Little did she know, the tutorial would drastically alter simply because she had not selected the status window. Subsequently, she beseeched Suhyuk to exercise caution. Next, she activated her focus order, prompting the goblins to abandon their search and sprint towards her. Nevertheless, aware that this was decidedly a non-failure mechanism, she launched an attack first. On a separate note, he announced that he had a precondition for sparing the creature's life, to which it fearfully inquired as to what the condition was. He informed it that he intended to bind its hands, without leaving room for refusal. Subsequently, the creature consented and labeled him as foolish, yet kind-hearted. Offended by the comment, he retaliated, threatening to kill the creature, inducing a flurry of panicked apologies and pleading from the creature. As it profusely apologized, he struck it on the head and demanded silence, before starting to search for a suitable rope. Upon discovering a rope on the ground, he tied the creature's hands. He jokingly inquired if the creature was comfortable, only to receive a retort asking how he would feel in its place. He then noticed something peculiar about the creature and questioned it, only to be met with a startled and confused reaction. He questioned it about the shiny object on its neck, but the creature fearfully concealed the item and denied its existence. He forcefully grabbed its neck, demanding to know why it said no. He removed the necklace, revealing that it was a cherished ruby necklace belonging to a young goblin. The necklace seemed to harbor a secret, hidden within the mysteriously gleaming red gem. Curious, he asked about the necklace, suspecting it to be of significant value, only to be told fearfully that he couldn't keep it. Despite this, he insisted that the creature should view it as a toll for its life and pay its due. However, the creature panicked, adamantly protesting that he couldn't possess the necklace to begin with. Aggravated, he threatened to sever the creature's hand if it continued to resist, but the creature still insisted it was telling the truth. Seizing the necklace forcefully, he was surprised when he hoisted it aloft and the goblin also rose, indicating that he genuinely couldn't possess it. In an outburst, the goblin reclaimed the necklace, vehemently reminding him of its previous warning. He apologized and started searching for his sword, speculating that maybe the necklace was an item tied to its life and might drop once it was killed. The goblin vehemently repeated that he still couldn't claim the necklace, even if he did kill it. He teasingly smiled and asked if he had scared the creature. The goblin angrily dubbed him barbaric. Once again, he assured the creature that he was merely joking and suggested that they proceed, given the day was growing late. Then they proceeded to walk. While walking, he asked its name. It replied that a goblin's name was a goblin. Angrily, he looked back and asked if it was messing with him. He ordered it to tell him its real name, but it merely looked at him silently and bowed its head in sadness. He realized that it didn't have a name and noticed that it resembled a character from a movie named Dobby. He then told it that its name was Dobby from then on, but it became angry and insisted that its name was Goblin. He started to walk again, wondering what he could possibly discuss with a childlike creature. Just as he was about to stride forward, he stopped when it shouted out a warning about a trap ahead. He asked how it knew and it replied that it was quite simple. Goblins could see in the dark. He was irritated, thinking that the creature had been pretending not to see all this while. Then, he noticed it looking at him happily. He wondered if it was seeking praise or something similar. Regardless, he found it useful and decided to tolerate it. He patted its head, calling it Dobby, praised it for its good work, and instructed it to inform him if it spotted any enemies or traps. Although pleased, it clarified that its name was Goblin and assured him it would alert him to any enemies it saw. Then, they started to walk again, with it directing him around the traps. He was amazed by its usefulness and asked it to hang back for a bit. He believed Dobby to be helpful, but knew that he must also do his part. He triggered the traps on the ground and sliced an arrow in half. He dodged the other arrows, feeling that with each avoided trap, his reaction time was improving. He easily dodged the arrows, prompting Dobby to clap in amazement and compliment his skills. Proudly, he looked at Dobby and stated that his body was mankind's hope. They then continued their journey, with Dobby informing him about different goblins along the way. A moment later, he was weary from the continuous fighting, and he complained, shaky and annoyed, about the long journey that had already lasted 2 hours. Exhausted, he asked Dobby if there were more enemies, but Dobby happily informed him that they had arrived. He lifted his head to look back and saw torches flanking the huge door. Raising his sword, he caught Dobby's attention, and the system asked him if he wished to enter the boss room. He knew that it had been 11 hours since he first entered this level and he was glad to finally be at the boss room. A system pop-up notified him that he had only 7 hours and 3 minutes remaining. They walked in front of the huge door and he asked Dobby if it knew what was inside. However, Dobby replied that it didn't know. He looked at it and told it that the situation seemed suspicious. This made Dobby shout at him, accusing him of disbelief once again. He touched the door while assuring Dobby that he trusted it because he knew that either way, he had to go inside the room. Then, he told himself not to be scared because he had cleared everything so far. The system then asked him again if he wanted to enter the boss room. He replied yes, and then a light appeared behind them and transported them inside. Once they were inside, he had only 6 hours and 58 minutes left, and there were only 10 seconds remaining for him before the fight started. He looked around and saw that there was one massive goblin with a steel plate, 7 goblin warriors with swords, and 2 goblin assassins with crossbows. In total, there were 10, which frustrated him knowing that, even though he had fought 4 before, this was significantly worse, especially the individual on the throne. It was a goblin paladin. A goblin, but also a paladin, and it was an honorable paladin that used powerful holy spells. He thought it was insane and that something was wrong, but he only had 5 seconds left. So, he calmed himself because he believed he could clear that stage. Dobby irritably shouted that it was too hot and told him the same. But he just told it to be quiet because he knew that he only had 1 second left. He loaded an arrow onto the crossbow while thinking that Dobby might not die since it was a goblin like them, but he knew he would die if he didn't finish them off. Dobby shouted a warning for him to be careful, then he pointed the crossbow at the goblins in front of him, understanding that he had to be cautious. He hit the monster in front with an arrow and slashed the next monster with his sword. However, he noticed more warrior goblins at his side running towards him, making him realize that it was too close for him to use the crossbow. He ran towards them, then threw the crossbow at one of the goblins, and slashed the others, understanding that he would die if he lost his rhythm. He looked back and saw 5 more goblin warriors from behind. But he was relieved that the paladin had not yet moved. He immediately ran and jumped towards the assassin goblin's location. It pointed its crossbow at him, but he kicked it before it could attack. He teasingly greeted it, confusing it, and then he pushed it into the lava with his kick. The goblin warrior was set aflame, but before he could react, it charged at him, eager for revenge. He parried its attacks and retaliated with a swift stab. Then, with a forceful thrust, he dragged it along and plunged his weapon into the other goblins. Witnessing this, Dobby trembled with fear and likened him to a monster. However, he simply cast an exhausted glance at Dobby, understanding the necessity of his violent actions to survive. He shot a resentful glance at the paladin who had been merely observing, as if he was a monarch watching a play. The man was infuriated. He risked his life battling these goblins while the paladin seemed to revel in his struggle. As the remaining goblins leapt towards him, his anger fueled his resolve. He gripped his sword tightly, slicing through the goblins with ease. He knew they were among the weakest creatures in this fantasy world, and he made sure they understood their place. After the skirmish, he slumped onto the ground, feeling as if he was on the brink of death. He checked the time and realized he had only 6 hours and 23 minutes left. The paladin turned to him, reached to its side, and revealed a colossal sword and shield. It fixed him with a furious stare. In response, he rose to his feet, pointing his sword at the paladin and accusing it of excessive hardness. He boasted of having vanquished over 10 goblins with his inferior weapon, while the paladin stood unscathed, clad in an imposing suit of armor. The paladin commended him for his performance as a human, but added that since their paths had crossed, his fate was sealed. His rage boiled over as he demanded to know what the arrogant creature had said. The paladin lunged at him, proclaiming his imminent death. It swung its mighty sword, but he skillfully evaded the attack. He knew that such onslaughts could actually work to his advantage. With a quick maneuver, he positioned himself behind the paladin, bellowing for it to meet its end. However, as he launched his attack, the paladin raised its shield. His sword shattered upon impact, leaving Dobby to shriek in panic about the broken weapon. While the paladin glared at him furiously, he stared at his shattered sword, wondering if this spelled his doom. The creature swung its sword to attack him, but he managed to leap to the ground to avoid the blow and rolled away to distance himself. Panicking, he wondered what to do, then remembered the dagger he had acquired earlier. He pulled out the dagger, observing that the paladin was smaller than he had initially thought. With renewed confidence, he decided that he could defeat it. He brandished his dagger, sternly declaring that they should engage in a second round of combat. The paladin lunged furiously towards him, but he managed to sidestep the attack. He spotted an opening and planned to stab the creature immediately, but was taken aback when the paladin swiftly rose and pushed him away using its shield. He landed on the ground, and the paladin leaped forward to attack him before he could stand up. It furiously demanded that he die and join Colline. Fortunately, he managed to roll away, causing the paladin's attack to hit the ground instead. The creature urged him to surrender, but he swiftly ran towards it. Ignoring its claims that his efforts were futile, he forcefully pushed its head, causing it to roll and fall to the ground. Without hesitation, he grabbed its face, lifted his dagger, and yelled a battle cry before stabbing it. Despite its pain, the paladin managed to call him a bastard, angering him further. He repeatedly stabbed it until, exhausted, he rolled onto the ground, relieved but cognizant of his close brush with death. Suddenly, he heard the creature whisper heal injury. Looking at the paladin, he noticed that it was slowly healing its wounds. It reminded him that its name was Goblin Paladin. As it staggered to its feet, it praised him for his resilience, stating that if he weren't so formidable, the goblins would have already killed him. His only response was a terse command for it to be silent. Shaking slightly, he raised his dagger, realizing that he needed to finish it off, though his body was uncooperative. Surprisingly, the creature fell, leaving him puzzled. As it collapsed once again, he wondered why it had fainted, and then remembered that his dagger was coated with poison he'd obtained from a goblin assassin. He waved the dagger in front of its face, tauntingly asking if it hadn't known. The paladin attempted to counteract the poison, causing him to question whether it was casting a detoxification spell. He ran towards it, exclaiming that it had a solution for every problem. He tried to kick its head, but the hardness of the paladin's helmet caused a crack in his leg bone. This elicited laughter from the paladin, who called him a foolish fool. In response, he furiously told it to be quiet and continued stabbing it. A moment later, its arm lay on the ground, exhausted from having repeatedly stabbed it. Triumphantly, he raised his hands and declared the ordeal over. However, the system indicated that he still had 6 hours and 31 minutes to eliminate all the enemies. This unexpected notification left him wondering why the fight was not yet over. Dobby walked closer to him and uttered, "Heal injury." A green light surrounded him, and all of his injuries began to mend slowly. Proudly, Dobby informed him that it had healed him. Surprised, he asked Dobby why it hadn't used healing spells until now. He was taken aback when Dobby responded that he hadn't requested its help. Though irked, he tried to compose himself and approached Dobby, conceding that it was his fault for not asking earlier. However, they still had a problem, prompting Dobby to inquire about it. He explained that he had defeated everyone and questioned why the system hadn't declared the task completed. He even proposed that Dobby might be the reason, to which it assured him it was not an enemy and implored him to believe it. Teasingly, he affirmed that he knew and was just messing with Dobby. He pondered if there was anyone left he hadn't defeated yet, but the lack of other paths led him to wonder if he actually needed to vanquish Dobby. A strange occurrence was a necklace that wouldn't detach, coupled with the presence of a goblin child that seemed out of place in the tower's setting. These oddities made him speculate if there was a hidden factor in the necklace. He then asked Dobby to lend him the necklace, but Dobby insisted that it wouldn't come off and called him barbaric, pleading with him not to kill it. Frustrated, he asked Dobby whether it would prefer to give him the necklace or face death. He ordered Dobby to hand over the necklace immediately. Filled with fear, Dobby was unable to respond and lay on the ground, presenting the necklace despite its anger. As he approached Dobby, he told it that it was adorable when it obeyed him. He then picked up the paladin's sword on the ground and warned Dobby to stay still, otherwise its head would be severed, causing it to tremble in fear. He then thrust the sword into the necklace's pendant, splitting it in half and releasing a red light. Dobby let out a piercing scream and emitted a strong red glow. Concerned, he shielded his face and asked Dobby if it was all right. When there was no response, he tried to open his eyes and saw Dobby staring blankly into the distance while a powerful force emanated from its body. Then Dobby released a light that shone yellow. He asked if the individual standing before him was still Dobby. The light descended to the ground and bowed to him, announcing that Goblin Penreek was expressing his deepest gratitude. Confused, he asked who Penreek was. Dobby replied, but he couldn't discern any sound. Shortly after, a system message popped up, congratulating him on passing the first floor of the tutorial, and informed him that he would enter the waiting room once his performance score had been calculated. His spirits lifted at the announcement, pleased to find that the necklace had been the issue. Yet, the thought of the waiting room sparked urgency in him. He sprinted towards the fallen paladin, shouting out that he hadn't even picked up a shield yet. He searched the paladin's body, expressing his frustration at how much effort he'd put into his victory without any items. He also questioned the fairness of being sent to the second floor empty-handed. Meanwhile, the system notified him that he had completed the hidden mission, Grief of the Goblin Tribe, and was now calculating his performance. Moments later, he found the Goblin Paladin's shield. It was a solid, sturdy shield imbued with holy power, with a level 2 wound healing ability that had a cooldown of 24 hours. He couldn't help but think that the paladin had cheated. His reward for completing the hidden mission was the company of Dobby, the goblin, in future climbs. However, he cared more for his newfound shield, leading Dobby to wonder what he was doing to the corpse. As he held the shield, he contemplated the hidden mission's completion. If Dobby was his only reward, it seemed like an imbalance. In frustration, he questioned if his life was worth only one goblin and scornfully referred to the system as a stain. The system, indifferent to his complaints, notified him that he was being transported to the waiting room. During the transportation, he continued his grievances, asking if the system was aware of the difficulties he had faced. The system showed him that his defeat of the paladin had resulted in a 3-point increase in agility and vitality. His conquering of the boss room led to a 2-point increase in all his stats. His pain tolerance, natural healing, indomitable spirit, and battle concentration had all leveled up. Furthermore, due to the first-class constellation, 9 Celestial Cow Lanes contract, the constraints on the 5th class constellation, golden light Penrique had been lifted. He was transported to the waiting room, while the system informed him that he could consume basic food and use the restroom there, having cleared the first floor. He thought the pay was lousy, but was grateful to still be alive. Looking around, he wondered if the healing system had been activated when he entered the waiting room, as he felt perfectly well. The system popped up, informing him that from now on, he could form sponsorship contracts with first-class constellations. It explained that climbers could receive support in the form of achievement marks or abilities through these sponsorship contracts with the constellations, which could be greatly beneficial in their future climbs up the tower. He replied uninterestedly that he understood and asked for more details. The system presented him with potential sponsors: the heavenly demon of the cosmos, the sword god who divided the galaxy, Ari, the lover of steel lava, and Echo from the enraged sky. He remembered hearing that if he formed a contract with a first-class constellation, then fifth-class gods, just like F-rank frauds, would appear. He was aware that powerful gods would appear on the 5th floor, so he decided to wait for now. The system presented him with food and told him that the remaining tutorial time for the 2nd floor was 11 hours and 57 minutes, suggesting he should rest. He looked at the food and realized it had already been 10 hours since he entered the tower. Just as he was about to eat, Dobby shouted at him for water. He was surprised that Dobby had followed him into the waiting room, but Dobby simply asked for food as well. He agreed, giving Dobby bread and water, and commended Dobby on its hard work, suggesting they eat together. When he gave Dobby the food, it immediately gobbled it up, causing him to stare speechlessly at his hand. Observing Dobby happily eating, he thought it behaved more like a piglin than a goblin, but he was relieved that the bread and water supply was unlimited. He asked Dobby about what it had said to him in the boss's room and if it had mentioned a pancake. Dobby answered angrily, but with its mouth full, he couldn't understand a word and asked Dobby to swallow first. Next, he asked Dobby if it was a god. Dobby confirmed this and added that Penrique was confined. He asked Dobby if Penrique was confined by some god's necklace, but Dobby replied that it didn't know. He wondered why Dobby had a necklace where a god was sealed, and Dobby informed him that it was a constellation necklace, Penrique's holy item. He asked Dobby to confirm if it was a constellation and wondered if he had saved the goblin god. Dobby smiled sweetly and affirmed his guess, adding that Penrique had thanked him and instructed Dobby to follow him. He couldn't believe that he had obtained Dobby's services for saving a god, but he realized that the difficulty level was extremely high. He wouldn't have been able to clear the first floor using magic with such a level. He then pondered whether the tutorial's difficulty level was job dependent and whether it was overly challenging. He worried about Heejung's progress, but consoled himself with the thought that, as a regressor, she was probably faring better than he was. Meanwhile, in Heejung's part, she remembers that before she regressed, she had made a contract on the 5th floor to emerge as a first-class constellation on the 1st floor. This makes her wonder if that god has weakened due to the after effects of the regression. She then tells the god that she understands that he has become weak because of them. She apologizes and thanks him, but assures him that she will demonstrate that his choice was not mistaken. Meanwhile, Suhyuk and Dobby are transported to the tutorial stage on the 2nd floor. The system shows Suhyuk that his mission is to eliminate all enemies within a remaining time of 9 hours and 59 minutes. He looks around to see what is different from the 1st floor. He notices that his field of vision has brightened slightly and a forked road has appeared. However, considering the time limit has been reduced by 8 hours, their choice will be crucial. He asks Dobby which direction they should take. Dobby seems confused, but Suhyuk orders it to inquire from its god about the correct path. In response, Dobby angrily asserts that Penrique won't provide any guidance. Suhyuk then asks Dobby which way it wishes to go. It responds that it wants to go left, and Suhyuk decides to follow it, trusting that Dobby's senses will probably be sharper in this environment as it was on the 1st floor. Suhyuk silently observes Dobby and realizes that he feels sympathy for the creature. He acknowledges that Dobby is a priest class and therefore he will have to fight while also protecting it. He regrets not taking the Goblin Paladin's steel-plated armor from the boss room. He warns Dobby that there could be a trap ahead, advising it not to lead but to follow slowly behind him, which Dobby understands. After a while of still walking, he asks Dobby if it is sure they are on the right path. Dobby, raising its voice, insists that Suhyuk trust it. Suhyuk expresses that he wants to trust Dobby, but they have been walking for 20 minutes and nothing has happened yet. Dobby responds by saying that doubt is a disease. Suhyuk apologizes, but still expresses his suspicion, which angers Dobby and causes it to call him rude. Suhyuk notices the road getting steeper and feels uneasy. He suggests to Dobby that they should go back, but suddenly, the ground beneath his feet gives way. He instantly yells out a warning about a trap and tells Dobby to avoid it, but nothing happens. He wonders aloud why no arrows are flying towards them and questions if the trap could be broken. Dabi trembles in fear. Suhyuk tries to reassure it, hoping that it's anything but a trap. Suddenly, they hear a loud sound, and an unknown object races towards them. They stand stunned and shocked. Suhyuk shouts at Dabi to run while he himself flees, and Dabi immediately obeys. Meanwhile, in Ha Heejung's attempt on the second floor, she noticed that the path split. In the past, the route had always led to the right. As she proceeded down the right-hand path, she realized that the tutorial had become significantly harder because she didn't select the status window. While navigating the floor, her thoughts were on Suhyuk. She wondered how he was faring, particularly if he had chosen a short-range weapon, which would make defeating the boss a difficult task. She pondered whether Suhyuk knew she was worried about him. Her mind wandered back to a time when they had drinks together, and she had congratulated him for finally ending his relationship with his ex, whom Heejung referred to derogatorily. Despite his ex initiating the breakup and being unfaithful, Heejung consoled him, saying that all was well that ends well. Suhyuk admitted he was aware of his ex's infidelity and confessed that, despite his treatment, he still held feelings for her. He shared that he missed her, and this confession made Heejung furious. She downed her entire glass of alcohol, surprising Suhyuk, who asked her to stop consuming so rapidly. Expressing her disgust, she accused Suhyuk of being overly submissive in his relationship. She demanded the bartender for 3 more beers, which shocked Suhyuk. As she strode off angrily, she reflected on Suhyuk's lack of awareness of her concern for him. She told Suhyuk not to die and came face to face with a large orc, which arrived faster than she anticipated. Activating her focus order power, she fiercely stared down the orc and launched a fireball at it. The projectile struck the orc's face, causing it to roar in pain and threaten her life. In response, it bragged about the power of its race, but Heejung simply punched its face and retorted harshly. She informed Suhyuk that she had more to say and ran past the orc, shouting that they should meet on the 6th floor. Concurrently, Suhyuk was struggling with his own trials. He was frantically reminding Dabi that he had warned it they were on the wrong path, but Dabi merely ran off, terrified. Noticing Dabi's short stature, Suhyuk instructed Dabi to jump on his back. With Dabi secured, he resumed running, only to have Dabi clutch his face in fear, causing him to order Dabi to stop. As they raced away, Suhyuk threatened Dabi with punishment once they escaped their current predicament. However, his attention was diverted by the looming presence of a gigantic rock nearly upon them. This forced him to pick up the pace and concentrate more intently. Panicked, Dabi predicted their imminent demise and blamed Suhyuk, even threatening him with a curse. Suhyuk, however, quickly reminded Dabi that their predicament was clearly its own fault. Then, angrily, he instructed Dabi to hold on tighter. He clenched his jaw, bent his legs, and leapt forcefully, causing Dabi to cry out, threatening to vomit. He implored it to hold on for a little longer. They collapsed on the ground at the side just as a massive rock struck the wall outside. Dabi inquired if he was okay, to which he replied that he was spent and did not wish to talk. Dabi activated its regeneration ability, healing his exhaustion and all injuries. He watched the cheerful creature, acknowledging that while it may behave foolishly, its abilities were not to be underestimated. Then he patted Dabi in gratitude, causing it to happily return the thanks. He considered Dabi somewhat cute and suggested they head right. However, Dabi immediately began to wander left, to his shock. He followed and questioned if it had not seen the rock that had tumbled from there, but Dabi just merrily continued its march, insisting they head left. He questioned its rationale, reminding it he had just indicated the left was perilous. However, he pondered if there might be a hidden advantage in following Dabi, and perhaps he could gain something even more valuable. When Dabi insistently declared they should go left, he concurred, stating that they would indeed go left. Looking at Dabi fondly, he decided to trust it one final time, even as the system indicated he only had 9 hours and 21 minutes left. In the end, though, his exhaustion won. He reflected on the numerous traps he had navigated, only to encounter a gigantic stone. He suggested to Dabi that they should just proceed, promising not to blame it for any mishaps. However, as he reassured it, Dabi pushed against the ground, causing the enormous stone in front of them to vanish, revealing a bridge. He congratulated Dabi, a hint of surprise in his voice, and then embraced it warmly, praising its good work. His excitement peaked as he saw shiny equipment atop the stone. The system revealed it to be the mighty orc warrior Karakshu's lightning mace. Though old, it was luxurious. Lightning encased the mace, yet the wielder remained unscathed. As he sprinted towards the remarkable bonus, the statue behind the mace began to crumble, and a colossal orc warrior emerged in anger. The dreadful realization hit him, he was in trouble. Suddenly, the system announced that he had discovered the tutorial's hidden mission, the forgotten tomb of the mighty orc warrior Karakshu. It would be factored into his final calculation. The formidable orc warrior, Karakshu, stalked closer to him, glaring with palpable anger, then launched an attack. Fortunately, he managed to jump aside just in time to avoid it. He mentally reminded himself to stay focused, noticing the mace lying within Karak's reach. He wondered if Karak would use the weapon, but no sooner had the thought crossed his mind than Karak grabbed the mace from its resting place and leaped towards him, swiftly swinging the weapon in a continuous onslaught. Karak roared in anger, the sudden display of raw aggression startling him and raising questions about why such a monstrous creature, seemingly devoid of consciousness, would resort to using a weapon. Karak lifted the mace, using gravity to gain momentum, and hurled it towards him. He had a fleeting thought that perhaps it would be more advantageous to fend off Karak's attacks rather than continuously dodging them. The mace was perilously close, but he skillfully blocked it using his shield, and then jumped backward, placing a safe distance between them. He quickly realized his disadvantage if the skirmish were to prolong. Karak was evidently stronger and faster. To make matters worse, a tingling sensation crept up his arm, residual energy from the electric attack still lingering. He knew they couldn't afford a drawn-out battle and strategized to strike before Karak had the opportunity. As he leaped towards Karak, who simultaneously launched its own attack, he was all too aware that he could not stop the brute force of the orc. He aimed to make Karak miss, planning to strike back after dodging. However, the mace struck his shield, releasing a powerful electrical charge that left him stunned. Suddenly, Karak was attacking again. He managed to block the strike with his shield, but the upward swing of the mace sent him flying backward. The pain was excruciating, yet he knew he needed to heal first. He quickly activated his Goblin Paladin's shield level 2 wound healing. Dobby, his companion, shouted a warning that his healing magic was ineffective. As a parting word, Dobby wished him luck, which only served to stoke his ire. He retorted with a frustrated comment, calling Dobby useless, and questioned why his ally wouldn't at least try to come close and assist him. But Dobby simply ran away, apparently finding him intimidating. As he was distracted by Dobby's retreat, he was caught off guard by another attack from Karak, reminding him that he was the one pitted against this monstrous adversary. He couldn't help but wonder how he was supposed to defeat this beast when he was clearly outmatched in terms of strength, speed, equipment, and virtually every other aspect. The creature rose and lunged at him to attack, but he deflected, sidestepped, and dodged it with ease, realizing that its attack pattern was simple. He leaped backward, aware that he didn't have a choice, he would have to take a minor risk. As he swung his sword, he called out Karak. Then, he tauntingly branded it a fucker, daring it to come at him. In a mocking tone, he added, "You're just a musclehead with a stupidly large body." He challenged it, asking if it was scared of him. The creature roared in anger and rushed at him furiously, confirming his suspicions that his provocation had worked. It lifted its mace to strike him with force, but he evaded it as planned, knowing that avoidance alone wouldn't be enough. He devised a plan to counterattack when the creature made a broad movement. But then he noticed that his attacks were only superficial. The beast charged at him again, but he managed to dodge its assault just in time, shouting that it was frightening. Next, he commanded Dobby to draw the monster's attention. However, Dobby just stared at him adorably, which irked him, leading him to refer to Dobby as an utterly useless entity. Meanwhile, Karak swung its mace relentlessly, chasing him while he ran, consoling himself not to be too disappointed as Dobby was, after all, as substantial as air. The creature swung its mace in a rage and he stopped running, aware that it was near. He noticed that whenever he fell behind a certain distance, it would revert to that same attack pattern. He resolved to halt the creature's onslaught, but not entirely. The moment the mace made contact with the shield, he would cast aside the shield, causing the mace to slip. As Karak raised its arm, he intended to use the recoil to his advantage. He anticipated that the next move in the pattern would be a downward cut. After taking a step back, Karak would attempt its next move. But at that instant, he used the mace as a stepping stone, leaping into the air and launching himself at the monster. This tactic disoriented the creature, allowing him to strike it with his sword before it could react. It screamed in pain and coughed up blood, then collapsed dead on the ground. Dobby ran towards him happily, asking if he was alright. But he only questioned why Dobby was now coming out. Dobby gave him a thumbs up with a cheer, declaring him amazing. This made him shed tears, thinking himself a fool for expecting anything different. Dobby noticed his state and asked why he was like that. He replied that he'd had a reality check. The system had shown him that he had defeated the mighty orc warrior Karak, who had been possessed by demons, and this would be reflected in his performance calculation later. He picked up the lightning mace of the fallen orc warrior Karak and swung it with joy, noticing it fit perfectly in his hands. Dobby told him his weapon was cool. He responded, saying Dobby's weapon was pretty cool too. This excited Dobby, who asked if his weapon was really cool. He silently apologized, for it was merely a throwaway. Suddenly, Dobby yelled a warning of an approaching orc. He turned to see 4 orcs growling angrily at them. There was an orc warrior among them, a valiant orc with a foul stench, a situation that could end badly if ignored. With a roar, he leaped at them, accusing them of ganging up on him after the hidden boss. He then electrified the orcs in his path, causing them to collapse to the ground. The others watched, stunned. He gathered his composure while the remaining orcs stared at him in shock. Looking at the mace, he was amazed at its incredible performance. He then eyed the orcs, feeling the tide of the battle turn in his favor. Picking up his shield, he wondered if they held another hidden piece. He asked them if they wanted to live, but they only charged at him in fury, shouting for him to die. He guessed that the second floor's hidden piece was just the mace. With a firm grip on the mace, he attacked the orcs, yelling that if they didn't want to live, they should die. A moment later, they arrived at the start of the second floor. He asked Dobby where they should go next, to which Dobby replied that they should head right. He agreed and told Dobby they should go right, surprising Dobby, who asked why he wasn't questioning the decision. He explained to Dobby that it was because he trusted Dobby's judgment now. This left Dobby surprised and shy. Dobby then started to walk ahead, calling back to him that Dobby was originally trustworthy and would lead the way. He immediately followed, shouting that Dobby was foolish, reminding Dobby that he had said it was dangerous for Dobby to go first. After that, they fought 4 more battles. He wondered how Heejun was doing, confident that she and Suhyuk, with their talent, were probably faring well. The system notified him that he had only 4 hours and 57 minutes to wipe out all enemies and asked if he would like to enter the boss room. They stood before a massive door when he asked Dobby if they were ready. Dobby affirmed. He then told the system that he would like to enter the boss room. The system transported them inside the boss room. Once there, they saw various types of orcs waiting for them. The system informed him that he had only 10 seconds until the battle began, making him think they were doomed. He noticed the orc in the back and realized it was a wizard. He wondered if he should start by taking down that enemy first. He had only 8 seconds left when he glanced at Dobby and considered leaving about 2 orc warriors for Dobby to handle. This decision confused Dobby, but he understood that it was a battle strategy. Dobby shouted angrily, insisting they shouldn't underestimate the situation. He wondered what course of action he should take against them. The system displayed that he had only 2 seconds left when he decided to prioritize Dobby's protection because Dobby was a priest. The countdown ended, and the system alerted him that the battle had begun. He stepped forward to shield Dobby, expecting the orc's imminent attack. Yet, the orcs remained still, which left him puzzled. The orc leader in the chair also trembled but managed to command its troops to attack. It tried to explain that they were together with Cao Lian, but was abruptly interrupted when another orc decapitated it, causing its body to slump lifelessly. He was taken aback by this team kill and asked Dobby what had happened. Dobby explained that the orc was Karaksh, which only added to his confusion. He questioned whether the orc had gotten a free pass just because he was wielding Karaksh's weapon. The system congratulated him for clearing the Tower of Trials. The remaining orcs knelt before him, proclaiming him as the liberator. The system then informed him that the mighty orc warrior Karaksh's Forgotten Grave hidden mission was completed, and he achieved a bloodless victory in the boss room. His achievement points were subsequently calculated while one of the orcs dragged the slain leader's body away. The orcs made way for him towards the throne, stirring more confusion. He asked Dobby for a more detailed explanation about Karaksh. The system revealed that his strength, agility, and stamina stats had all increased by 4 for defeating Karaksh. His other stats had increased by 2 for completing the hidden mission. He had also acquired level 3 in pain tolerance and natural healing, level 2 in electric resistance, level 5 in indomitable, and level 6 in battle concentration. The system also showed him that the completion of the mighty orc warrior, Karaksh's, hidden mission was tied to the orc liberator's selective hidden mission. The selective hidden missions were generally more challenging than the conventional hidden missions. He understood that Karaksh was difficult, but he was astounded to find that the selective hidden mission was even harder. Then, he remembered that the status window did warn of the difficulty. However, it was hard to trust what the Tower of Trials claimed, particularly if the tower had caused Dobby's death in the way it had led them. He speculated that if they had taken the right side path because of the traps, they wouldn't even have discovered the hidden mission. The system indicated that when no time remained, he would be unable to change his decision. If he wished to abandon the selective hidden mission and proceed to the 3rd floor, he simply had to utter the words "waiting room." The system then showed him that he only had 2 seconds left. Considering the high-risk, high-return situation, he suggested to Dobby that they should proceed, to which Dobby affirmed they would. The system announced the beginning of the Orc Liberator's hidden mission, providing him with only 59 minutes and 59 seconds to complete it. Upon entering, they were taken aback by the sight of an orc pushing a rock on level ground. He wondered about the orc's purpose, noticing there wasn't an explanation in the notification window. The system revealed that only 46 minutes and 51 seconds were left, leading him to speculate if it was an orc liberator mission. He approached the orc, questioning if it was a foe. Looking back at Dobby, he asked if it knew the orc's identity, but Dobby merely shrugged. The old orc addressed him as Liberator in a ragged voice and asked if he could lend his strength for a moment, as it desired a brief respite. He queried the orc's identity, to which it replied Perictus. He asked why it was burdened by the rock, suggesting it could simply release it. However, the orc declared that doing so would cost it everything. He suggested that the orc could simply dodge to the side and questioned how he could trust and listen to it. However, the orc remained silent. He asked Dobby if this was a test from the tower, but when Dobby failed to respond, he realized the folly of his question. He proposed holding up the rock after inspecting the right side path first. But the orc only looked at him silently and sadly. Frustrated, he discarded his weapons, swore, and then grabbed the rock, asserting that he was sure it would work out and that the orc should hand it over. But, noticing the old orc's smile, he wondered if he was making a mistake. As the orc slowly moved away, he was taken aback by the weight of the rock. He attempted to hold it, pondering if it was a trap, and if he was supposed to liberate the orcs at his own expense. He knew that if his concentration faltered for even a moment, he would be crushed by the rock. The old orc thanked him teasingly, but the rock was so heavy that he could barely speak. The old orc instructed him to be patient and not let go of the rock under any circumstances. Enraged, he told the orc not to toy with him and asked if it believed he would willingly allow himself to be crushed. The old orc referred to Dobby as a child of Penreek and suggested they leave. Dobby agreed and followed the old orc. He gazed at them, wondering where they were going, and asked Dobby if he was being betrayed. Then, he urgently called to Dobby in his mind, pleading for him to stay and assist. As his leg slipped slightly, the stone shifted, shocking him and causing him to press himself firmly against it. Overwhelmed by anger, he attempted to prevent the stone from rolling with all his might. He then conveyed to Dobby, his voice trembling with fear, that he was on the brink of death. He called out to Dobby again, with the system indicating that only 42 minutes and 31 seconds remained. Later, the system updated him that only 23 minutes and 54 seconds were left, making him realize that 20 minutes had elapsed. He wondered why Dobby hadn't returned. Suddenly, the elderly orc appeared before him, expressing his appreciation for the hard work he had put in. Dobby echoed this sentiment. The orc explained that its role had merely been to fortify the bonds of life and thanked him for pushing those bonds to their limit, all while presenting a shining necklace. The orc draped the necklace around his neck, informing him that he too would be repaid for his efforts. Once again pressing itself against the stone, the orc thanked him and instructed him to rest, causing him to collapse in exhaustion. As he gasped for breath, the system revealed that the necklace was Perictus's Necklace of Will, a gift from Perictus to the Liberator. This item held an unknown power within its brilliant, dark green gem, and was capable of boosting his resilience and battle focus by 5 levels. He expressed his gratitude to the elderly orc, who responded by saying it was merely a reward for his good deeds. Then, he noticed a ring on the orc's finger, something that hadn't been there before, which led him to wonder if the orc had retrieved it from the crossboards. He slowly stood, suggesting to Dobby that they should depart, a notion to which Dobby agreed. However, something caught his attention, causing him to question Dobby about the movement of the rock. Dobby queried his statement, causing him to second-guess his own perception. The system confirmed that he had completed the hidden selective mission, and that his completion of the 3rd floor was recognized. Additionally, he would be transported to the waiting room once his achievement marks were calculated. Yet, he asked Dobby to wait, which confused Dobby. He then placed his hands on the rock and pushed with all his might, leaving the old orc stunned. He reasoned that if he could be of even the smallest help to someone else, he would do so. The elderly orc gratefully acknowledged his efforts, promising to return the favor someday and urging him to stay alive until then, which surprised and confused him. The system acknowledged that despite his weakness, he had played a part in resisting the overwhelming odds. As a bonus achievement, 17,432 achievement marks would be added, bringing his current total to 44,108 points. Then, the system transported them to the waiting room. The system informed him that he had attained level 8 in battle concentration and indomitability, and level 5 in intuition. Also, in accordance with the first-class constellation, 9 celestial bodies Cowlian's contract, the shackles binding the 5th-class preliminary constellation, Will of Protection Perictus, had been released. The system informed him that he had successfully cleared the 3rd floor of the Tower of Trials, earning him access to the climber rank list. This achievement was also approved by the community. Subsequently, they were transported to the waiting room on the 3rd floor. The system indicated he had 9 hours and 59 minutes until the next tutorial. Feeling a surge of joy, he shivered and loudly declared his victory. Dobby jumped around in shared elation. Then, Dobby went straight to the water, leaving him bewildered. He questioned why Dobby always comes after him. The system alerted him that henceforth he was eligible to have second and third class constellations as sponsors. Several constellations appeared, offering sponsorships, but he dismissed them. His primary interest was in finding something to eat. Just as he noticed something unusual, an overjoyed Dobby asked if it could eat everything. He clarified that it couldn't and observed the endless supply of bread. Later, he requested the system to display the climber rank list. He held the top spot, having accrued 44,108 points on the 4th floor. Ha Heejun was in second place with a private score on the 5th floor, followed by Alexei Brahman in third with a private score on the same floor. In 4th place was Ivo Andrik with 802 points, and Mashbai Kara ranked 5th with 728 points, both on the 5th floor. The system asked if he wished to make his total score public, but he declined. He sighed in relief, assured of Heejung's safety, then berated himself, realizing he should be more focused on his own situation. Dobby, annoyed, questioned why he was self-inflicting harm by punching himself, and retaliated by throwing its own punch. Knocked to the ground, he seethed with annoyance. Dobby, sporting a lump on its head, bore the brunt of his angry gaze. He conceded that Dobby had a knack for getting under one's skin. He pondered why the 4th-placed individual only had 802 points, how they were lagging behind by 43,000 points, and why everyone else was on the 5th floor. He decided to check the community chats and was shown various conversations. He found a discussion about a goblin warrior on the 4th floor perplexing, questioning why he had encountered the formidable goblin warrior on the 2nd floor. Suspecting deception among the community members, he was interrupted by a message from Ha Heejung. The system asked if he wanted to accept it, and he eagerly agreed. In the message, Heejung inquired if he had arrived after clearing the 3rd floor, and informed him that he could send messages simply by thinking about it. In response, he revealed that he had completed a hidden mission on the 2nd floor, which had propelled him directly to the 4th. Surprised, Heejung still praised his effort and expressed concern over his fatigue. She apologized, expressing regret for not having anticipated the increased difficulty of the tutorial without the status window. His confusion grew as he wondered about Heejung's remarks and the implications of a tougher tutorial without the status window. He asked her if she meant the things he had done were of a higher difficulty. She replied that it wasn't just a little, and she had even given up in the 2nd floor's boss room. Also, if it weren't for him, no one would have cleared it. She apologized to him because she really couldn't clear that stage. But instead, she would try to assist him thoroughly from then on. He assured her that it was alright and she didn't have to apologize. But in truth, he was surprised because even Heejung, the regressor, couldn't clear it. He then laughed and guessed that finding the hidden piece was really fortunate for him, while Dobby, worried, remarked that he had a weird face. Heejung asked him about his total score and told him that she had about 7,400 points. He responded that he had around 44,000 points. Surprised, she asked if it was true, to which he replied in affirmation. She told him she guessed the close-range fighter Kwon Suhyuk was on another level, prompting him to ask what she meant by that. She replied that she didn't need to explain further, but told him that he did well and they should exploit it more when he clears the 4th floor since he can access the shop from then. He agreed and asked her if she had any tips for the 4th or 5th floor. She apologized and explained that she had only heard a few things about them, so she wasn't really sure. He asked her where she had heard it, but she told him that she would tell him once they meet later on, and asked him how long until his 4th floor trial begins. He replied that it would start in about 9 hours and she advised him to rest first and they would talk afterward. She also reminded him to stay healthy, rest if he wanted to, and wished him good luck. He responded with agreement and reassured her not to worry. As he thought about checking out the community, she messaged him not to stay there for too long because he might feel sick. This left him shocked and wondering how she knew about it. She told him they would meet on the 6th floor, to which he agreed and reminded her to stay healthy as well. He then asked Dobby who Cao Lian was. Dobby, with a shout, told him it was Constellation Penrique who was lost and it didn't know Cao Lian. He asked if it had lost its constellation and if it could be Cao Lian who had locked Penrique up. Dobby angrily replied that it didn't know and, from the past, it wasn't born. He then asked Dobby what made it believe in Penrique. Dobby explained that suddenly, it heard Penrique's voice and the necklace appeared, leaving him wondering what Dobby was even trying to say. He lay down next to Dobby, thinking that from the 6th floor, he still had 2 more floors left. Later, the system indicated he had only 1 hour and 3 minutes remaining. As he slept, it revealed that the climbers were not his competitors. From the 5th floor, author Kevin Urich informed everyone they would lose their standing on Earth if they failed to climb. He insisted they all enter the stage tower, implying the warning must not be a lie. He further implored everyone to collaborate and cease the distribution of deceptive tips. Bria Arsif, also on the 5th floor, concurred. However, Eric Sakop, occupying the same level, suggested that the tutorials were straightforward. He mused that this tower ordeal might simply be a trial they could overcome. potentially making them the rulers of the earth. Wang Wei, another denizen of the 5th floor, endorsed this idea. He added that forming teams was only for the weak, challenging Kevin to admit his fear of solo climbing. The community then vanished, and the system welcomed him to the 4th tutorial floor. Upon arrival, he noticed a downhill slope with an uphill on the opposite side, causing him to wonder about Dobby's whereabouts. The system indicated he had 1 hour and 59 minutes to escape. Unexpectedly, the terrain began to shift. Stunned, he realized the ground beneath him was sliding. He immediately sprinted downhill, questioning if it was a speed run but recognizing the need for immediate action. The timer continued its relentless countdown as he ran, the physical exertion feeling almost lethal. Despite his uncertainty about his strategy's correctness, he pressed on. He pondered the possibility of an undiscovered area in the opposite direction and whether any rocks were falling. Despite the disconcerting illusion-like sensation, he pressed on, understanding that he couldn't afford to stop given the distance he had covered. As he did, he felt a headache coming on. Unexpectedly, confetti burst into the air and the word finished appeared, leaving him puzzled. The system commended him for completing the 4th tutorial and announced his impending transfer to the waiting room once the points had been tallied. The system revealed he'd earned an additional 3,208 points, bringing his total score to 47,316. For not retreating and not triggering any traps, he gained 2,000 extra points, increasing his total score to 49,316. The news of his transition to the waiting room left him bewildered and surprised. Despite this, he realized he had been heavily reliant on Dobby's judgment. This realization, oddly enough, induced a happy smile. He informed Heejung to stand by, as he was on his way to carry her. The system acknowledged his determination and resolve. He had never retreated and showed unyielding willpower. As a result, he earned level 9 Indomitable and level 8 Intuition. Also, it was shown that he had cleared the 4th floor, enabling him to use the shop and form a sponsorship contract with 4th class constellations. He was transported to the waiting room, where he was welcomed by Dobby, who was complaining about being bored. He told Dobby that he didn't have time to play with him, pointing to the system that indicated he only had 3 hours and 59 minutes to rest. He informed Dobby they didn't even have 4 hours left before the next floor's challenge began. Dobby, pouting, told him that if he didn't want to play, he could just forget it. He apologized to Dobby and noticed a message from Heejung on his system, asking if he would like to open it. Cheerfully declaring it perfect timing, he agreed. Heejun congratulated him on successfully completing the 4th floor. He thanked her and mentioned that it seemed she was close to breaking into the 5th floor too. He then asked if she had gathered this information from the climber's ranking list. She replied affirmatively, stating that she had been only looking at the ranking list in the waiting room. She then asked about his current achievement marks. He replied that he had about 49,000 points because he hadn't been able to find the hidden piece this time around. Heejung assured him that he did great and their lives were the top priority there, even more so than the hidden pieces. She informed him that all climbers needed to finish the tutorial on the 6th floor for the actual tower challenge to begin. She added that if even one person failed to finish, there would be a deadlock, causing the forums to go wild. He asked her if the forums went wild because of him and what she was referring to. He then opened the forum. The system showed him people who were angry due to his first place ranking despite his low floor status. Some were furious and wanted to teach him a lesson when they met him on the 6th floor, which made him curse in fear. She advised him to visit the shop and buy the essence of lighting. He asked her to wait for a moment as he opened the shop. The system displayed the shop, and he noticed all sorts of items there. He proceeded to find the essence of lighting. Upon finding it, he was shocked to discover that its price was 45,000 points. Heejung asked him what he was doing and urged him to make the purchase. She also advised him to buy a body reinforcement brew with the remaining 3,000 points. He was taken aback by the price but reassured her that he could make the purchase. She reminded him to also buy the body reinforcement brew, to which he agreed. He purchased it, and the equipment materialized on his table. The essence of lightning, in its quintessence, contained the power of light. The energy stored within this essence, however, was unrelated to constellations and its absorption rate varied according to the user's abilities. The body reinforcement brew was a limited item within the Tower of Trials, a concoction designed to bolster a climber's physique. The level of reinforcement it granted varied based on the climber's abilities. Heejung advised him to consume the body reinforcement brew first, and then imbibed the essence of lightning, surprising him and compelling him to agree. He asked, rather apprehensively, if it was acceptable to simply ingest them. She affirmed his query, instructing him to eat it without hesitation. He removed the lid and immediately consumed the brew. Suddenly, he felt a peculiar sensation, followed by drowsiness and a wave of dizziness. He slumped onto the table, yet he was conscious enough to reach for the essence of lightning, knowing that he had to consume it as well. This caused Dobby to panic, inquiring anxiously about his well-being. The system notification informed him that he had consumed the body reinforcement brew, and hence all his physical capabilities were being enhanced. It also confirmed his status as a challenger, hence the restrictions associated with the brew were lifted, resulting in a significant increase in his physical abilities. Moreover, the system noted that he had ingested the essence of lightning, which infused his body with the power of light, leading to a dramatic increase in the absorption rate. Consequently, he achieved a minimum of 1 enlightenment, with a remaining time of 5 hours and 52 minutes. He opened his eyes and scanned his surroundings, noticing a multitude of stars around him. This led him to wonder if he was in space and how much time had elapsed. He searched for Dobby but found no trace of him, which led him to question if he had to overcome this trial solo yet again. He ambled around, pondering the meaning of gaining enlightenment, questioning whether it referred to combat instincts or self-realization. Gritting his fist in frustration, he questioned his purpose during this ordeal. He noticed an unfamiliar power coursing through him, but he realized that he couldn't afford to be distracted. He pondered what he was supposed to attain enlightenment about. He realized that ever since his arrival at the tower, he had been in constant battles, but he was certain that something differentiated the first floor boss room or Karak's enlightenment. He recalled how he could read his opponent's movements clearly and simply acted in the most optimal manner. One thing was certain, he never lowered his guard, even when he was superior to his adversary. He was well aware that in battle, swift, real-time decisions dictated outcomes. However, when the system displayed that he had 5 hours and 23 minutes remaining to achieve at least 1 enlightenment, he scratched his head, suspecting that he may be off the mark. Then he remembered that while he was climbing the tower, something had popped into his mind. The tower had presented him with countless choices. He acknowledged that Heejung had offered him advice as well, but in the end, he had made the choices. Therefore, he bore the responsibility for them, making him wonder if the tower would accept his small enlightenment too. The system indicated that he had gained at least 1 enlightenment and congratulated him for clearing the 5th floor. Afterwards, he was transported to a waiting room while the system displayed that he had achieved 4,000 mark points. This brought his total score to 5,316 points. The system also awarded him a status window, but the method of viewing it was different from the status window provided in the first floor waiting room. He exhaled, and the status window revealed that his title was Seeker of Truth at the Crossroads. His affiliation was unknown, and his constellation sponsor was unknown as well. His skills included Essence of Lighting level 3, Intuition level 8, Indomitable, Battle Concentration level 13+5, Natural Healing level 5, and more. Dobby asked him if he was alright since he had suddenly collapsed and vanished. He slowly stood up, assuring Dobby that he was fine, and that he must have been relaxing while he was absent. Dobby replied in affirmation and offered him bread and water. He thanked Dobby but clarified that both objects were indeed bread. Dobby explained that it had moistened the bread, to which he reluctantly agreed and thanked it. The system then notified him that he could form sponsorship contracts with 5th class and preliminary 5th class constellations from that point on. He examined this information while Dobby looked at him cheerfully, thinking it had actually mixed saliva into the bread, not water. He recalled Heejung's advice that there would be a resting place after he completed the tutorial, before proceeding to the 6th floor. There, he should form a contract with the least impressive-looking god. He clearly remembered Heejung suggesting he form a contract with the least impressive-looking god while reviewing the multitude of constellations offering contracts to him. He contemplated whether it would be more convenient to simply consult Heejung. However, when he attempted to send a message, the system informed him that, for a short while, some forum and messaging functions would be restricted. Every climber who had cleared the tutorial was required to form a sponsorship contract before proceeding to the next floor. He sat in frustration, wondering if this was also a scheme by the tower. But then he remembered that Heejung hadn't instructed him to avoid making a contract. As the tower had insisted that he form a contract, he considered accepting the offer from the preliminary 5th class constellation, Farmer in the Tranquil Orchard, who had proposed a sponsorship contract. He was aware that there are moments in life when he would be captivated by something, leading to a moment of conviction. When he saw the message, he felt that this was such a moment, an intuition that he should make a contract with that constellation. Then, the system asked him if he would like to form a sponsorship contract with the preliminary 5th class constellation, Farmer in the Tranquil Orchard. He replied affirmatively. The system then confirmed that he had made a sponsorship contract and that he had completed the Challenger tutorial, earning him 10,000 points. This brought his current points to 15,316. Additionally, it showed that he had gained enlightenment, earning the minimum qualifications to be a preliminary constellation. The title of Seeker of Truth at the Crossroads was bestowed upon him.